Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today I'll be doing a box office long-range forecast for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which is likely going to be yet another box office disappointment for Disney Studios. But before going any further into this, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with the bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live onto the channel. So this was some news that I had seen picked up by Clownfish TV just the other day, so shout out to Clownfish TV, but it is being brought to us by Box Office Pro, and it was posted just yesterday. And one of the things that Box Office Pro does, as you know, is not only they project what the weekend numbers are looking like based on industry numbers and standards and projections, but they also even do long-term and long-range box office tracking as well, just to see how well films are doing early on, before, months before they have a release. Is the buzz looking pretty good? Are the projections looking high or low? And in this case, for Shang-Chi, it is not looking very good for this movie, which is really not all that much of a surprise, simply because every Disney release so far this year has been a massive disappointment. When you look at just the, how much they've been spending on these films, which has always been roughly $200 million on just the production budget, and the fact that their return on their investments really aren't showing up in any way, because even though you could point to films like Black Widow having a seemingly strong domestic opening weekend, getting around $80 million or so, and then they, of course, claim that they made, a crap ton of money overseas, or rather a crap ton of money on Disney Plus to make it over $100 million, and one of the only $100 million films to open up domestically with that kind of opening weekend. It is still something where in the long-range numbers and in the actual cost of the films and the actual cost of marketing, etc., and the delays that so many of these films have had, we start to realize that these numbers really aren't enough at this point to make back the money. When it comes to Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, there is, of course, a question mark as to whether or not this film is going to be able to have a very successful China release. A lot of people on the ground in China have pointed out that they feel like Disney, in this case and in other cases previously, are kind of trying to just really play lowest common denominator here, trying to say, hey, look, we're going to feature a bunch of Asians in this movie, and so therefore you're just automatically going to see it. And there are a lot of people who go to the theaters in that country where they just think to themselves, no, I don't want to be pandered to. I don't want to be pandered to. I just want to have fun entertainment. The reason why these films tend to do really well in China is because they are just these massive, big budget Western movies that aren't nearly as common in their marketplace. And so when China does actually allow for these Western films to come into their country, they want to be entertained. They don't want to be pandered to. And so that is one of the factors here is at play. Also, of course, there's the question of, is the relationship between China and Disney in any type of hot water? Is there a potential of these films getting pulled out of the respective countries, especially when it comes to China? That's, again, something that has to be taken into account. And the thing that I always mention is that even if this film made $200+ million in China, in the actual raw net gain from that number, because they only get 25% from the Chinese marketplace because of the communists there that take 75% of the actual box office revenue, it would only get about $50 million in actual net gain profit. And then you have to compare that to what it's making everywhere else, take into account they get about 60% of the entire box office in total. And then you start to realize that these numbers really aren't panning out as well for them, because they have to be able to pay back not just production, but also marketing costs, with especially these delays, is going to be quite a bit. So let's actually look at the numbers themselves. And one thing that Box Office Pro does is they do mention the pros and the cons. So what's looking really good for this movie, what's really looking good for the films that are set to come out, that they are finally doing some breakdowns for, and then also what are some things that are looking bad, what are some cons, what are some historical things that we can mention that is going to have an impact on the overall box office. And so we go down here to Shang-Chi, which again scheduled for September 3rd release, and as you can see, $35 to $55 million is the projected opening domestic weekend for this movie, with them expecting it to make anywhere between $100 and $165 million total domestically. These are very early. Obviously, this film does not come out until early September, and we're in the midst of films getting pushed back. For instance, Venom, just the other day, got pushed back to later in October, I believe. And so I would not be surprised if down the line, Shang-Chi also had that kind of pushback as well. They're also trying to really make it clear, and at least as far as the Disney is concerned, that they plan for this film to be a theatrically exclusive release, a 45-day theatrical window before being available on PVOD and premium services for you to be able to purchase them online as such. So are they going to stick to that model? Because they said that they were going to do that for films like Black Widow and then ended up putting on Disney Plus anyway. And we see that they've obviously tried to claim that they made certain numbers on Disney Plus. And again, you can take them for your word, or you can question it like I and many others have, because it was the only film that they had ever really done it for before. And since then, it's only been Jungle Cruise that they've given us any sense of what kind of money that film was actually making. But it is something that I think, because it's not in official capacity, it's not being reported by third parties, it's just being reported by them, and it's a number that they are projecting. They can basically be basing that off of anything. They could be basing that off of percentages and say, oh, we may have made this much money, and then just, again, playing with their words to make it seem like it was more successful than what it actually was. But again, according to third-party sources here, the film is looking to make somewhere between 35 and 55 million, which, even when you base this in pandemic numbers, is not a very strong weekend. And if this is a film that is only going to be available in theaters, even though I think that's a good thing for theaters, obviously I wish that theaters would actually get good films, and films that are a little bit more original in concept, and films that people might actually want to go see. Obviously, this is still something where having it be a theatrically exclusive release from Marvel and a gigantic company like Disney and a gigantic property like any Marvel movie, that is obviously going to be a little bit better for the theaters. But when you look at that number, 35 to 55 million, studios get the vast majority of that domestically when they first open up. And so if the number is going to fall off tremendously, like we've seen with other major releases from Disney and Warner Brothers, this is not really a very strong start and not looking good for the future of just not only Shang-Chi, but also of movie theaters themselves. And to kind of give you an indication of this, let's go ahead and look at some of the big releases from these big studios to come out over the last couple of months. So for Black Widow opened up to $80.3 million domestically, and then fell 68% to $25 million. And normally the way it works is within the first week or two, typically speaking, every $10 spent on a ticket, $1 goes to the theater while $9 goes to the studio. They usually get around 90%, sometimes more. It depends on some of the deals that they make with the bookers, right, who book films at different theaters. But they get a huge chunk of the returns from the box office, and the box office gets very little. The way that movie theaters make money typically is from popcorn sales and drink sales, which requires people to physically actually be at the theater. One of the reasons why their prices are so crazy high is because they don't really get much from those ticket prices. It takes a few weeks before those contracts start to become a little bit more fair, and the studios get less money, and the theaters can sometimes even getting that completely flipped and making the vast majority of tickets sold. But that's at the point when maybe you have just a few people going to see that movie. And so they still rely on new releases every single week to be able to keep people coming back to the theater to either use their subscription programs like for AMC. They obviously have AMC Premiere, or to just come and buy popcorn and drinks so that way they can make some money and to stay afloat as well. And what we've seen from this is that Black Widow, though, again, that $80 million for pandemic times might seem like it is pretty impressive. When you look at the 68% drop, which was one of the largest in MCU history, to $25 million, you start to see that progressive drop-off week after week after week. You start to realize that they are not really bringing a whole lot of people to these theaters. The people are still very much trained because of the way that these studios have been handling things during the pandemic, of having everything be brought to streaming, having a heavier focus be put on streaming. And all of this, of course, was to try and, get bailout money at some point for the studios because of the hardships of everything, and trying to make it seem like they wanted to help out the theaters too. But in the end, this was all just a giant push, at least it seems to be a giant push for studios to try and basically go completely exclusively streaming, keep all of the revenue, all of the profits, and then not have to worry about splitting any revenue whatsoever with these theaters, which is why theaters really are on the decline. So this was one of the more successful ones. Let's then go to a film like Suicide Squad, which, whether you like the film or not as good. $26.2 million. Some people will point to the fact, well, it was for free on HBO Max. Yeah, exactly. And how many new people signed up for HBO Max specifically just to watch that movie? Or how many people kept the service an extra month just to see that movie? Until there is that type of a metric, you can't have any of that money from HBO Max being counted as far as a net gain for this specific film. We can talk about HBO Max and Warner Brothers being profitable by that service alone, or, you know, any factor like that. But when we're talking about the actual profitability of an individual film, we have to have actual numbers. We have to have actual data. And right now, with the data that we have available to us, $26.2 million for a film that costs around $185 million to make is just not going to cut it. Not to mention, it's not making anything overseas in comparison to other films that have come out this year, and also, of course, in previous years, and that's obviously because of the pandemic, but even films this year have been able to do better overseas in certain areas and certain markets than this film has been doing. So $26 million, and this film is projected to have another massive drop. There's expecting it to be up to a 70% drop in the weekend total for the second week. And so once again, people just aren't going to see it. Also, remember, this film was projected to make around $30 million, and it came in under expectations. And we see that actually happen with almost all these films. Every one of these movies has either come in at the very bottom of the projected range or a little bit higher than the projected range, with one exception being Suicide Squad here, where it actually made less. Jungle Cruise, right? $35 million is the amount of money that this film made, which, based on the last updates that they did to their box office estimates, ended up coming in around what that minimum projection was going to be. But still, $35 million for a $200+ million budget film is just not going to cut it. So when you take that into account, $35 million is what Jungle Cruise made, Suicide Squad $26 million, Black Widow is $80 million. When you're looking at the opening weekend here then for Shang-Chi, $35 to $55 million, you're looking at a movie that's going to probably do somewhere in the range of Jungle Cruise, between Jungle Cruise and well below the number for Black Widow. And these are just the early numbers. I imagine that as we continue to get closer to this movie, one, there's that chance that it'll get released on Disney Plus and they'll make an announcement. Two, there's the chance that this film gets pushed back. Again, Venom just got pushed back, and I would not be surprised if other films get pushed back as well, because obviously everyone's getting totally freaked out about the Delta variant and forced vaccinations and all these things, right, that are going to just drive people away, not because they're afraid necessarily, but because they're just like, no, you know, screw this. I'm not going to deal with going to a theater if I have to wear a mask, or if I have to, by force, receive a vaccination, right, to go against my individual freedom. People are going to just say no. And all you're going to do is have the same thing that happened the last year and a half. People be driven more so to piracy, or just to wait for it to come out online, to save up the money that they would have spent on popcorn and drinks and on movie tickets, and instead save that up to build up their own theater system, to build up their own home theater system, and be able to enjoy everything with the best sound and image possible, with the ability to pause, buy their own popcorn for significantly less money, and still be able to have a good time, to watch older films, which they know are not going to just try and preach to them about modern day issues, and instead just allow them to be able to escape into different worlds. And even though the original concept, the idea of Shang-Chi might be interesting, the way in which it's been portrayed in the trailer has given me no reason to think that it's going to be successful, at least domestically, because it doesn't feature anybody that any American audience member is going to say, oh, I have to go see this film now. When you look to the actual casting of the film, there's only really a couple of names that even stick out. Michelle Yeoh is the only name that I was able to recognize from the film that had been in previous things, had been in successful things, like, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, for instance. So she's a name that some people might know. Aquafina is in there. And if Aquafina, especially in the modern day market, because I think Michelle Yeoh is much more talented and is a much bigger name, but in modern day younger audiences, if the biggest name that you have is Aquafina, How do you expect to be able to bring? And we already know that the age of and the era of the star is dead. Even Dwayne Johnson can't save Jungle Cruise from being a massive financial flop. So what is the mindset for anyone to think that this movie is going to be any type of financial success? I just can't see it. Right now, as far as the budget is concerned, the only number that I've seen reported from a site where, again, I can't really trust it, which is why I'm not having it on the screen, but they said it cost around $150 million. I would not be surprised if it's somewhere between 150 and 200, because that is what typically Disney will spend on these Marvel projects, whether they are big or not. So if you have a film that costs that amount of money, which means it costs, $225+ million with marketing, and you might even have to extend that because of the delays, you're looking at a film that's going to have to make north of $450 million worldwide to break even. And in an age when a film like Black Widow, which right now, based on these early projections, is doubling what this film is projected to make in the opening weekend and is only at 350 million and might break 400, maybe, you start to realize that it's not a very good position. And obviously, Disney is going to be relying on China. I guess that's the last thing to mention about this film, is that they're going to be relying on China. They're going to be relying on the Chinese marketplace for this movie. And honestly, I think it might just be a bit of fool's gold for them, because you have to keep in mind that 25% cuts. And if you look at the international releases, you see that you have places like Australia, UK, Germany, and Mexico listed here. And I guess one last thing that I will do is just to see if there is actually a release date mentioned. Normally IMDb, even though I hate what they've done to boxofficemojo.com, they completely ruined it and destroyed it. But one thing that IMDb does pretty well is be able to collect all of the different release dates for any given film in all the different countries. So based on this list right here, as I'm going down, trying to see, do we even have an official date yet for China? According to this, we don't have an official date for China as of yet. That does not mean that they are not going to have one, but according to IMDb, there is no official date. So if their whole idea and if their whole marketing plan is to have a massive success in China, and so they're casting and choosing the story and marketing it for a Chinese audience, and they don't even get to release it in China. If you think $35 to $55 million is a bad opening, I imagine it could be much, much worse, falling probably closer to a Suicide Squad or even a Jungle Cruise at that bottom end of the range. But this range will be updated as we get closer to the date. And what are your thoughts? Do you think that Shang-Chi will be a box office flop based on these numbers, even if it got $55 million? Going again to Black Widow at $350 million when it made a good $30 million more based on this projected number. That means that this film is just logically wouldn't be able to even get close to 350, maybe even not cross 300 million worldwide, meaning that this film is essentially guaranteed to be a flop unless something major happens, unless there is some type of breakaway success. But based on, again, these trailers from another director who is known for doing independent films, it's hard to say how, and really hard to see how this or any other major film this year to come out, big budget film to come out this year, is going to be anything to talk home about. And I guess some more long-range things to look forward to. The Protege is actually one where the trailer looked kind of intriguing and interesting. I know not everyone's liking it, but Maggie Q plays kind of like the spy character, this hitman character. And I don't know, there's just something about the trailer that I really liked, because it really didn't show her as being OP. And I know some people have kind of said that that's what the trailer seems to indicate. But when I was looking at it, the way in which they portrayed her character and her moveset, and also the people that she was fighting against, it just came across as more realistic, especially since she's done this kind of role before. I don't know, I guess I buy a little bit more into it. And then this other film, Reminiscence, is set to come out on HBO Max actually this next weekend, and it is a film starring Hugh Jackman. So I hope it doesn't end up being like Transcendence with Johnny Depp. And I only say that just because it has a somewhat similar name, but we'll see. There's some movies at least coming out. And anyway, let me know your thoughts about Shang-Chi, whether you think it's going to be a flop or not, or any of the other films that I've mentioned or films that I didn't mention. Let me know, especially in that pinned comment at the top of the comment section. You guys are all great. Thank you again for watching. Make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey. You're amazing. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my August Locals, Patreon, and Subscribe Star members, starting off with my Locals crew: Cats App, The Real It, D Sharp, Biffer the Hobbit, Robert Barnes, and Goblin Squatch. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Locals. And now on to my Patreon members: Andrew Hoyle, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Lance, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Benden, Tina Bojan, and Tina B, the Empress of the Universe. Thank you very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And lastly, to my Subscribe Star peeps, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And a shout out to one new member, Hannibal Grimm. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Subscribestar, and to everyone for supporting me on these platforms. Also, a shout out to all of my YouTube members. You get shouted out at the end of every single live stream. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, please check out my locals Patreon Subscribestar. And you can go ahead and find those links in the top link of this description. You can find it's called the Willow link, and it'll have a list to literally all of the social media platforms and all the different ways that you can support the channel. If you join at the $1 level, you can actually get your name shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream. $5 level gives you that, plus you get access to exclusive giveaways of 4K titles. Right now, I've got tons of 4K steelbooks to give away this month, including for Top Gun. I also have A Quiet Place Part 2. I have Snatch on 4K, the John Wick trilogy on 4K, and also I have a Sicario 4K disc as well, and a bunch of others that are going to be coming in this month too. So if you want to have access to any of those types of exclusive giveaways, join at the Army of Asgard level. At the $10 level, the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get all of that, plus you get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, including instant reactions when I go to see movies. I do quick little filmings of myself and talk about the films that I have seen and my instant reactions to that. You also get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger once or twice a month, and you get to also ask us any question that you want. We put a Q&A post up, and you get to ask us whatever it is that you want to ask. So again, if that sounds cool to you, Keeper of the Bifrost level. And lastly, there is the Chosen of Valhalla level, where you get all that stuff. Plus, in your first month as a Chosen of Valhalla member, you get a free t-shirt, your choice, ship it anywhere in the world, and also you get to once a month be featured on the OMB Reviews channel, and you get to talk with me. We usually chill out for 3 to 4 hours, and I ask everyone what they've been watching, what they want to talk about, what they want to promote, and it's always a really good time. And so if that sounds interesting to you, please consider joining. That is going to be on Subscribestar and on Patreon only, as Locals is just the Keeper of the Bifrost level. But anyway, thank you all very much for your time, for your support, and for listening to this shout-out video. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.